Thank you for coming. I know you've been not so much on the AI circuit, because that's not such a thing, but like quietly you'll be asked by the Pope or the Prime Minister of England and France on one trip to talk about AI and those opinions. And there's been much talk about AGI, which is not what we're going to talk about today, but more, given the collection of the bright minds here across with science and, investing, but with a variation of experience on AI, how would you have them think of AI as a structure set as we ask other questions over the next hour?
All right, well, I'll do a little bit of level setting, and some of you, this may be old hat and boring, and others it may be new, so I'll try to go through this quickly. The artificial intelligence revolution that we're in is actually a scale compute revolution. The algorithms that are deployed, even though there's a lot of iteration and learning as you get to scale, there's new things that are being done, are not new. But what is new is the ability to put together tons of compute and tons of data and significant teams behind them, and that's part of what we're doing. And when you begin to think about what problems have been solved already, like, what's really interesting is 10 years ago it was like, well, the Turing test would be really hard. We kind of sailed past that without even really actually even like, oh yeah, wasn't there a Turing test back there somewhere? And part of that is because in some very substantive and important ways, language is an interface, making every single compute unit, everything you have, a phone, a PC, but also a car, anything else, now much more intelligent. And part of this is it will lead to kind of a revolution and an amplification. That's the book that Steve was gesturing at. It's kind of artificial intelligence as amplification intelligence. And part of the reason I did GPT-4 with the heavy lifting was to show, not just to tell, part of how it was operating. And part of that is because if you think we are linguistic creatures, if you have something that's amplifying how we use language, that's for everybody. So like, for example, if you go in an industrial parallel, you think the steel industry, it's like, well, what does AI have to do with you? Well, you have sales, you have marketing, you have meetings, you have collaboration, you have accounting, analysis of books, all these things. Language amplifies all that. And so even scientists, and we'll get to a more specific science thing, obviously everything in communications and all the rest, whether it's grant writing, emails, analysis, et cetera, all of these things, the language models that we have built off the kind of scale compute and scale data and teams putting that together have made it that everything that we do with language is going to have an amplification assistant. And so that's baseline. That's not even getting to any of the things we're doing. And the other last kind of opening, kind of remark, but we're obviously going a lot of different places in this conversation, is the speed at which this is happening. Because, like, for example, to kind of go back to one of the pieces of history is, it was somewhat bemusing to the kind of interesting things in the OpenAI side is, ChatGPT gets released, obviously creates a huge storm, there's a bunch of different critiques, and since, when ChatGPT was first released, it didn't have GPT-4 in it, and they're like, wow, it doesn't do this. I'm like, yeah, but we already have the model that does that, and that will be released a little later with this. And so the speed at which, month by month, there are improvements because of scale of compute, application of data, figuring out how that works it's a evolutionary moving target that the capabilities are increasing on a cadence that is small n months at each cadence.
Thank you. You, when we were talking about this, one application specifically to scientists, we could focus there, in a state of optimism as opposed to apprehension. You compared it to having sort of a lab assistant between the ages of, a smarter than you to young. What does that lab assistant today look like? and what will it likely look like in the next year and a half, and what are some pie-in-the-sky things that you kind of see a glint of?
So I actually said research assistant versus lab assistant, given that it's a mental construct versus physical construct.
Right, sure.
But the one good way, there's multiple ways in which you begin to think, what does this generate? And so part of what you have today with GPT-4 and models like it, Pi, Claude, others, is essentially a immediate research assistant that already has superintelligence. And part of that superintelligence is it's trained on 1.5 trillion words. There is no human being who does that. Doesn't mean it's not a database, does not necessarily have exact recall. That's some of the hallucination stuff. But it can do things across a breadth that basically is superhuman. So for example, if you said, well, I'm really interested in, what are the parallels between what's going on in neuroscience and what's going on in economics, game theory, give me some parallels, what are some key things? Or I have an argument that artificial intelligence can get to superintelligence by using these forms of data, make the argument against it. And that doesn't mean it's always right. It has a higher hallucination rate than your currently than a polymath, senior undergraduate, early graduate student who would do all this, and it's much more polymath and all that, and lacks certain elements of kind of common sense, where a researcher will go, oh no, that the answer I'm giving you is actually BS, and the research assistant would know that and presumably would say that. But on the other hand, it's immediate, and the superpower is already immensely broadly synthetic across domains where each of us gets expertise. So for example, I go and use an AI assistant to try to assist in a specific investing decision about something I'm expert on. It can be useful for helping draft a memo, or saying what are the list of considerations that I might look at and go, oh yeah, I should think about that third one a little bit more than I have been. But when I go to doing something like trying to understand something I don't understand yet, or to going synthetic crosswise comparisons, like what would modern neuroscience may ask me about the following kinds of game design, or this strategy in game design. I'm thinking, what would the parallels be? What might I look into, et cetera? It will generate something on the spot and start that dialogue. Now, obviously one of the things that happens within science is the worry about hallucinations, and the question about how do things get right or wrong in this. And hallucinations, Michael will probably ask me a follow-up question on this, but that's a solvable problem to a human standard. And so that's a moving thing. The second thing is, as you begin to sure, you may have some hallucinations, but if you just said, it's gonna write the paper, you're gonna have some trouble, even maybe in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But the fact is that it could kick off some things and be a very good co-pilot, co-thinker, personal intelligence with you on this stuff is already today. So to the last part of your first question on this stuff, what's coming? Well, if you say, well, look at the trend line between GPT-3 and GPT-4. What you get is a lot more robustness, a lot more depth, actually, in fact, a lower error rate. You'll begin now integrating it with various things which will help with hallucinations, like it says, oh, I think the following citation could be really good here. And of course, if you can go look it up on the internet and go, oh, there is no such citation, let's refactor that answer as a possibility. So all of that kind of robustness will continue. Part of what happens as you get to each of these different levels of scale, you also get some interesting kind of new functions. One of the things between 3 and 4 that was a surprise is 4 has at least the capability of doing interesting, quote unquote, dad jokes and kind of humor. Having a sense of humor is interesting. I would hope that 5 or 6, one of the things it might be able to do is come back with interesting, provocative questions, given the broad synthetic. Today, I think most of the times when you ask it to generate questions on various things, unless you're very good and very specific on the prompting, most of the questions that come back aren't very interesting. I tried to actually get some dialogue for the book, the impromptu book that Steve was gesturing at, and all of the dialogue was really terrible. I hope that maybe mimicking an interesting pattern of human dialogue to kind of construct more of a dialogue might be a future thing. And then these will have various kinds of applications, whatever you're doing with language, whether it's research, whether it's science, whether it's communications, whether it's any number of things. Each of these things are parallels in that. Now, we can also get to where our AI, the future patterns may also get to specific, not just language amplifiers, which obviously is part of what we're seeing with ChatGPT and so forth, but it depends on where we end up going in the conversation.
Okay. With my physician add-on, I was early on amazed at how little we can do about some things, how some drugs don't really change much. But if the patient thought they were improving, they were at least happier instantly that you handed them a prescription. And that the role of emotion in, like a patient coming into the ER is important. Are they coming in for a symptom or out of apprehension or fear? And so, surprisingly, and this is where we get a little bit, not confrontational, but contrarian to some, we don't miss a lot of diagnoses, but we miss a lot of opportunities to improve a patient's heart state, mind state, and we do that on probably almost every patient. Are these AIs being trained on human emotion as well as language now, or is that something around the corner, or?
Well, some of them are in various ways, because one of the things, again, some people in the audience know this, others don't. So first, you have a whole set of techniques by which you say, on large language models, how do you construct the kind of raw ability of predicting the next word, of lots of these things, in order to create a linguistically capable agent. Another thing you then do is reinforcement learning with human feedback, and that's extremely an important part of all these things, not just for, and we'll get to the emotion question, but not just for things like that, but also it's one of the reasons why, one of the more amateur things said is, oh, there's all this crap data on the internet, so there's all this crap stuff in the AI. It's like, well, actually, in fact, it learns a whole bunch from the human feedback, like, about what kind of things not to do and what kind of things to do, and it's part of where you get safety and alignment training, but it's also where you get a whole bunch of other attributes for it. And so, for example, Inflection, the company that Mustafa Suleyman and Karen Simonian and I co-founded, which is doing this product called Pi, which is a personal intelligence. It's part of the viewpoint of the future, is that we will each have an AI that is our kind of, as it were, life companion, navigating life, navigating work, et cetera, and it's one that's specific for us. Obviously, EQ is as important in that as IQ for the same reasons as doctor and physician. And so Pi is trained specifically to be kind of emotionally intelligent and present. And I'm not kind of talking about ontology as much as behavior. And so the human feedback learning, and part of the thing about what differentiates these different agents is what kind of human feedback learning regime did you put it through, how many different kinds of things, how did you train the trainers, what did the trainers do? And so Pi is deliberately kind of kind, compassionate, but not necessarily agreeing with you about anything you say, but trying to be interactive in a way that a person, and it's not anthropomorphic, but a person in conversation would be being kind and compassionate in that interaction, while not just doing what you tell it to do or anything else. And so that pattern of training is already present in a number of agents. I used Pi as an example because it's specifically, one of the specific thoughts within inflection was to put as much energy into training EQ as IQ within the human feedback learning and the kinds of examples and the kinds of things that you're trying to have as an interaction.
I was trying to, you brought up a question for me. I'm not sure I can phrase it well enough for the audience to make sense, to be clear, but like years ago, if a personalized email, dear Reid, a comma, that was like, oh, you're taking extra time to personalize an email. And then that became automated, and it didn't seem like as big a deal to personalize an email. Or then it did, how are you in Oklahoma? I mean, all those things you can personalize now. Do you think people will be hungering to look for, like, what parts were AI generated as it gets so good at, faking's not the right word, but at mimicking things which today elicit a sense of, oh, the AI will, cares about me, that people will start to think the AI does care about them?
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, that's why you already have, foolish folks who go, I asked if it was conscious, and I told me it was conscious, so therefore it's conscious. I mean, you already have that foolishness. Of course, you'll have this stuff too. Now, one of the things that's interesting about making it even more human is that because an AI can, and since I didn't ask him if I could do this, I won't name him, but a famous academic friend of mine was earlier this year starting to play with ChatGPT because I prompted him to, and one of the things he did is he basically got an email request that he'd had about a study he'd done, and it said, draft my response. And it drafted a response that was literally, he was like, I could just send that, right? Because it was thank you for your inquiry, I really appreciate the work you're doing. On the work that I've done, I'd be delighted to share the highline results. I can't share the specific information due to kind of individuals' confidentiality, but the highline results I can share with you. If you are doing this work and continuing this work, it's an area that interests me, and I could be interested in future collaboration depending on where you're going, and I would appreciate being updated on your results. That was the AI-generated email reply.
Which is pretty good.
Right, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
And by the way, part of that thing about being more human is that like he just might not have had time to respond almost at all, because like all of us in this room, super busy. And in fact, he got a very detailed, accurate thing that reflected his intention on what he would want to have this academic who was reaching out. And the person gets a very human response because of the AI thing. So while I think people will be tracking that, I think that the actual quality of the humanity of the interaction will go up substantially because of this.
Okay. Should we be training people as they learn how to write, learning how to ask questions of humans, and then say, and no, it's the same question of an AI, so should we be training people how to think in terms of asking questions effectively to AI?
Well, certainly, although it's evolving at such a speed, getting to a training regime now is very difficult.
Got it.
But it's one of the reasons why in the impromptu book, one of the things that people take away from it is something about how, in relatively simple use of language, you can learn to get prompting to more interesting responses. So one of the things I made the Chrome clear in the book, which is the places where GPT-4 wrote answers, I did my prompt and the answer to kind of show through it on this kind of human travelogue of education and journalism and public intellectual work and other kinds of things as ways of doing that. Because actually, in fact, learning to use this tool is going to be, in a sense, as important as learning any other tool. Like if you said, I'm a graphic designer and I don't know how to use Adobe or Figma, you're like, you're not a graphic designer. I'm a financial analyst and I don't know how to use Excel. You're not a financial analyst, right? And so this is going to be that across all of this area. And so starting to use it, to understand it and use it is fundamental to any cognitive work.
When we were in Oxford, I remember you wanted to be an academic. So then when we didn't keep in touch for a couple of years after that, when I turned around, you were off to other things. Tell us about a bit your journey there and how it pertains to your journey, today.
So, my theory of the game when I left Stanford, did the Marshall, was to say, okay, let me see if I should pursue academia. And one of my very similar paths, person is in the audience. Ron's here, I think over there somewhere, who was also symbolic systems, also went to Oxford, also went from symbolic systems to philosophy, continued on as an academic. And what I realized was that for me, the specific work of, and I had academics kind of my own, I will only speak to myself, kind of snootiness about industry, saying, oh, well, smart people do academia and less smart people go into business. That was my own mistake. But it was like, look, what was really important is I get to scale. And the scale impact of things was I could have a much better sense of how to build things through software. And so it was like, the fortune of having gone to Stanford is I was aware of software entrepreneurship, so I came back to do it. Now, one of the things that was a real gift of this path to me was realizing I just hadn't really fully understood all of the different intellectually interesting things that are in the commercial side, that the fact of how you get to scale and do it, that the ability to pull things together. Like, for example, if you said, current kind of like deep AI teams, kind of the minimum viable team is probably, 25 people, 30 people, probably closer to 40 to 50. Having a team assembled like that, working on something that's really fundamental, is much more out of the commercial side than out of the academic side, with very few exceptions in terms of scale of team, not just scale of compute and scale of data when you look at the AI side. And the fact is the ways that you fit within getting to scale within society. Because the commercial model is not just like, oh, eureka, I have an idea in academia, and then I do kind of translation and people kind of go figure out some product to sell. But actually, in fact, it creates a whole entity, an ecosystem that continues to invest in it, develop it, get it to broader audiences, make it more impactful, et cetera. And so part of the thing that in the move from academia into industry was kind of figuring out a whole bunch of ways in which you also help elevate humanity at scale with a whole set of kind of understanding of the OS of how society works, of how scale projects can be pulled together, of how scale works. And that also has a whole bunch of social impact considerations, intellectual considerations, viability of idea considerations. And so that was one of the things that was, a gift of an accident of going, oh no, because I have this impulse of wanting to do to scale, not just doing scholarly work, that actually opened up a lot of understandings about impact and society and different kinds of intellectual work and so forth. And that was part of that path.
Yeah. I've had the honor and pleasure with you of doing some impact investing, for-profit investing at Greylock, or not at Greylock itself, but through that, and work on a couple nonprofits. And so we talked this weekend about, a leveraged idea as opposed to a leveraged company, and some of them would be in companies and some of them not. I know you make your investments out of your personal money for profit, your foundation, and Greylock and other vehicles. how do you think about that, and how do you distinguish them?
Well, look, the parallels across all of this are, is there an interesting theory of the game of how you can build something interesting and sustainable? Is the person bring the right talents and network, and can you assemble those assets and some risk discount? So let's, as one example, use, the work that you're doing for this, which is, your superpowers include, in addition, obviously, knowing medicine extremely deep, having done a bunch of different kind of both kind of social impact entrepreneurial, QuestBridge, amazing transformation of lots of people's lives, but also being a systems thinker. So you think, okay, a natural thing when someone thought about, like, we're at this cusp of really understanding a bunch of different threads coming together in BrainMind, let's just get a bunch of scientists together and let's, fund some scientific research. Important thing to do. He said, no, actually, in fact, that itself is very good, but insufficient, and it will be much more unique if we bring in kind of industry forces the right way and some investors and think about companies and make it into a mixed ecosystem where the network and the systems thinking is a way of elevating it. And that's a rare talent set. That's something. So it's like, okay, I will help with BrainMind doing that because that's a vision for bringing it together that's beyond like a company idea or a idea. And that kind of parallels how I think about this. How I think about it as a company, I say, well, is this person going to be the right person for constructing a company? If I think about it as a science project, is like this person going to pull together this science the right way? And generally speaking, am I the right person to be participating in that? Or in cases of what you've done in a number of different of your projects, BrainMind included, most recently, is how do you make parallels across domains where the benefit is much more than 1 + 1 is 2, but 1 + 1 is 5 or 10 because of the synergies that may connect between a scientist and a commercial effort, or a scientist and a kind of some meme, or media or other things where that creates a massive elevation that helps humanity. And that's what I look at as an investor. And then specifically, because I don't think I'm like, one should always be in investing. Where do you have some unique edges, and why should you be doing the investing there? And for me, it's certain kinds of people of talent, certain kinds of human networks, certain kinds of technologies. But like, example, if someone brings to me and says, I've got an invention of a new battery, it's like, well, there's other people you should talk to about investing in a new battery. I don't have any expertise in that. And I don't mean that, there's many broad zones, and I was just using that as an example.
Yep, and what are some other examples, like, or describe what you thought about them, like Change.org going from a for-profit to a nonprofit, OpenAI going from a nonprofit to for-profit? Like, it seems as
not quite, but
not quite.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not being precise.
Yep.
What do you try to keep ahead of what you think the change needs to be, or do you respond to it? Like, are you looking ahead in your time? What's your time horizon for looking for if you need to make a pivot or not?
Well, so the macro process is you have a theory of the game, which is here's how we think we can make the world in this way, commercially, something else. Almost always that theory of the game is something that's like, 5, 10, 20 years out. Here's some of the initial moves that we think we would get to such that we'd be closer to that further out world. Let's do those, and let's see what's working and not working. It may change your theory of, do you have product market fit? It may change your theory of how the world's working in various universes, including commercial, how competitors are moving, what technologically becomes available or is available or becomes less available. And as you do that, your theory evolves, your theory of the game evolves. Now, as that's happening, you you're learning positive things, you're learning negative things. If your new ideas for how you continue towards your original target are less good than your old ideas, that's when you begin to think of pivoting. So you have kind of a rough fitness function on, are my new ideas about how to bring this product to market, or how to get an ecosystem built around, people think about the brain and psychiatry and kind of mental states. Is that, are my new ideas better or worse? Is my progress, am I making progress to it? I'm not making progress, and that's the kind of the things that you factor. And the changes, for example, of, in the Change.org side starts as a for-profit, but the part of the problem is say, well, let's shift it to a nonprofit because it'll be a better fit for the kind of the purpose of people believing this is a way that you speak truth to power and try to get institutions to reform. In the case of OpenAI, which continues as a nonprofit but has a for-profit subsidiary that it is governed by the principles of the nonprofit, say, well, in order to get to scale and doing the things we want, which is beneficial AI for society, we can only do that by having an intensely allocated set of commercial resources, including compute and a bunch of other things for doing that. So we'll have a commercial arrangement with our subsidiary, which facilitates our for-profit mission.
Okay. Who has a loud, booming, unmiked voice? Who would like to ask a question as a spontaneous thing?
There's a hand over there.
Yep.
Just a quick one. How do you train on emotion? What's the data set?
That's Steve, who you saw up on the stage earlier. Yeah, asking for a friend. How do you train on emotion? So the principal thing, like roughly speaking, what you try to do in these trainings is you have a bunch of different, and most of the highest quality AI foundational model folks build their own trainer networks, because part of what they're trying to do is get trainers who are capable of saying, now please, 50 of you, now please try to train this on being, more X and less Y, more informative, more summary, more compassionate. And part of what you'll then do is also provision them with a stack of kind of potential prompts or potential circumstances or potential things that they will then go in to do. And when the model is in training mode, you give it a prompt and it comes back with 2 answers, and you tell it answer A is better for that prompt, and you might even give in some training data then typing in why that's the case. And so it isn't go pull out even though, by the way, these things are trained on tons of information, it isn't like go read the psychology textbook, right, and use that as an instance, even though all of that data is usually in these models in various ways. It's the refinement through the human teachers is the primary data set.
One more question.
And here?
Right there?
Oh,
Yep.
Esther. Hey, Esther.
Hey, Esther. Yeah, what you got?
Sorry, the lights are bright. Yes.
I would argue you're asking it to train on expressing emotion rather than
Yes.
having it.
Yep.
The second is, as you think about the state of the world, we talk so much about training AIs, but we ought to be thinking more about training babies in order to resist the manipulations of bad business models enabled by AI in order to be better humans. And in a sense, this is what this conference about mental health is about.
So Esther made 2 points. One, that it's actually not training emotions, it's training emotional behavior. Broadly agree. Although I think my one slight mod to that is I think one of the things that's very interesting about all the advantages of what we've been doing with kind of machine intelligence as it begins to really begin to scope out more about what we think about what our different intelligences. Because we tend to go, human intelligence is the pinnacle, and there's this weak parallel in some animals, whereas animals are much more intelligent in a lot of ways than we reflexively give them credit for. And now when we have machine intelligence as well, we begin the scope of what is intelligence. So like, for example, there's a lot of worries people express about what happens when you get to superintelligence, and the answer is we have superintelligence already with GPT-4. It already has some things that are cognitive tasks that it's much better than any human being on, and that's interesting, that not terrifying, and is a useful tool. So but on the emotional side, the parallel to that is, like, I don't think that these machines have emotions. But the emotional landscape of where behavior from human beings and behavior from animals and behavior from machines play in, and how we understand the whole landscape is, I think, an interesting area to provoke to study. But I broadly agree with Esther's first point. Her second point is to say, well, rather than training machines, we should be training humans to have a good, healthy position, resist possible bad manipulation from machines, because there is already some areas where there's bad manipulation. It isn't just obviously AIs. There's various forms of video advertising and a bunch of other things, but the whole stack of these things. And obviously part of the thing that we were trying to do is figure out how to have human beings be better, both for their self-possession themselves and how they relate to other people, and I think it's a very good thing. And so I don't disagree at all. There are different time cycles and availability in training and scalability. Now, one of the things I would say about the, part of a little bit of a general pattern of counter thesis to one of the things that was implicit in your second question, Esther, that I want to highlight is that they say, well, AI will be a problem with X. AI can also then be part of the solution. So you say, well, let's take something that's off the, there's obviously parallels with, actually I'll go to the parallels with advertising in a second, but like say, well, we have this deep fake thing where, an AI can pretend that it's your, parent, child, whatever, calling you for money, trying to get money out of it. Well, if you have a personal intelligence that's there with you, says, oh, this looks like it could be one of those potential scam moments, ask something that only the two of you know, right, as a way of navigating this. So an AI can be the defense on a deepfake thing. Now, the same thing in terms of advertising, which is, part of the model that Inflection is doing with Pi is say, well, we'd actually want this to be a subscription model, not an ad model, because it's on your side, and that part of what it would then be doing is its entire orientation would be in helping you navigate. And so, for example, say, undoubtedly at some point we will have these personal intelligence agents plugged, like your own one plugged into your own browser, your own phone. And you may be looking at an ad and something, or a social media post and getting enraged, and it might say, well, actually, in fact, you might think that this might be manipulating you for the following reasons. And so in addition to obviously training humans, which is a great idea, no contest, AIs can be trained to also be helping you in that circumstance. And there's nothing to say that a commercial entity can't do it. That's part of what we're trying to do at Inflection too. So anyway, but as a gestural addition. And I think I reported your second question accurately.
More or less.
Okay. Cool.
Simply, the challenge we're facing in our society now is humans are being damaged rather than being encouraged to be better humans.
Yeah. So to repeat is Esther, is like one of the central challenges we're facing is humans are being damaged in various ways by AIs, other pieces of technology, and so forth. And what we want to be doing is helping, encouraging them to be better humans, and that's something we should keep as a central focus on what we're doing.
See if I can surprise you with a question based on
Sure.
on that thesis. I remember all the way back to Oxford, and you put a lot of preference on friendship. and you thought a lot about it, and you'll make a distinction between an acquaintance, an ally, a friend, and to you, a friend is a big deal. It's an investment. It's a number of things. You recently went to did a graduation speech on that, I believe.
Last year at Vanderbilt, yeah.
On friendship, and I know we've toyed with the idea of concepts of a book that you'll be doing. Why did you pick that topic, and how has that evolved for you since our time in Oxford, if at all?
Well, if you'd asked me, and now I've written 5 business-ish books, but the only book I'd write was probably on friendship when I was an undergraduate at Stanford. And part of it's that, this thing where it's pretty fundamental, like also this question about how do you become a better human, is friendship's pretty fundamental to how we lead better lives. And yet, if you walk into a bookstore and you ask for the relationship section, you'll have aisles and aisles and aisles of self-help. And you ask for the friendship section, right? Like, what friendship section? There may or may not be a book on friendship. There have been a couple recently, last couple of years, that I need to read through and see what I think of them. But it's an amazingly delivered area. Everything from interesting kind of, most of the self-help stuff I've seen on it is, look, it's great. If that helps you, great. But that doesn't really help kind of a normal, empathetic person thinking about friendship. And then also philosophically, psychologically, et cetera, what are the things? Because it's pretty easy to get to a set of questions around, for example, what are the responsibilities of friendship? And people say, well, loyalty, picking someone up at 2 a.m. when they're stranded at the airport. And you're like, okay, fine. What are the other ones? Like if a person's screwing up in their life in some way, what's your obligation? When should friendships be forever, or should they be temporal? When should you end a friendship? What are the, how are the ways that men are friends with men, women, different sexual orientations, et cetera, and how are women friends with women, men, et cetera, and what are the parallels and differences? And once you begin to ask all these questions, you realize that there is a rich topology here that we all kind of, it's like saying, well, we know how to breathe because we do it, but do we really actually understand, kind of this reflexive behavior we're in? And so part of what I try to do in commencement speeches is to try to give something that's important to the graduates who are commencing on now with the rest of their life, and also something that's kind of an important thing to notate in the world. So that was part of the reason why I did that at Vanderbilt. And at some point, probably minimum 18 months, but maybe much longer from now, I'll get back to trying to work on this. Part of the reason I say minimum 18 months is I'm anticipating that 24 is going to be fugly on the political circumstance, and that will be absorbing a lot of time.
I have a personal preference for the election, I think, that you and I share, and I want to thank you on behalf of humanity for your work on that topic.
Yeah, it's going to be fugly. January 6th is going to look like a garden party.
Well, that's depressing.
Yeah. Mic drop. We have a few more minutes, so we can change some more interesting things.
Yeah. Well, back to friendship, actually.
Yeah.
What are surprise nuggets as a gardener of your life that you think people underestimate, ignore, or don't even think about at all in terms of cultivating those relationships, from even picking who you might pick as a friend to maintaining and a growing relationship of that sort?
Well, so I think one of the things, so fundamentally kind of the theory of friendship that I would get to writing at some point is two people decide to help make each other the better versions of themselves. So Person A is friends with person B. How does person B get to the better version of themselves? Person B is friends with person A. How does person A get to the better version of themselves? And then all of the things that come out of that is what you would choose to do. But a simple, more concrete thing that comes out of this is to think about, how can I be a better friend? If you are genuinely friends with somebody, what is the cadence of which you're asking yourself, how can I be a better friend to this person? And then also, for example, classic nature nurture thing is friendship involves skills. It involves skills of communication, of listening, of being able to understand the other person, of understanding what their better self might look like, helping them see it, walk that path to it, avoid other things, being able to accept that and receive that in return. And so asking yourself, well, how do I improve my skills as a friend? How do I do that? I think very few people do that, and I think that's critical to do.
I certainly have appreciated the, in many blind areas you've helped me to see over time. Trying to think of something that would be useful to the audience and not scripted.
Should we go back to science? I'm happy, probably everybody is interested in friends, so that's a reasonable thing, but obviously you've got an amazing group of scientists here.
I'll mix the two then, I guess. I mean, because you obviously have built a lot of companies with your friends, right?
Yeah.
Even after LinkedIn was succeeding, I watched an unintuitive tribe of people come into LinkedIn who you knew well, who all added a lot of, value to LinkedIn, but with whom then you had rich relationships where work was almost like home in some respects. In a culture where some would say, work's over here and home's over here, and never the two should meet. How do you, when you create a company that has a mission, but you want to create a good culture and enjoy it, how do you mix all those things together?
So, a good question and very complicated. Obviously, at some level, you have to start with the most fundamental duty of how do you have the company and the project succeed? And that is your most fundamental thing, even though you would have various reasons and preferences for working with friends, working with people who might be friends. The most important thing is the collective duty of trust, combination of society, customers, other employees, investors, et cetera, to assembling that. Now, that being said, a little bit like one of the questions is people tend to say, well, you should put friendship totally aside from this, and it's corruption if you prospectively hire people who might be friends with you, who might be friends with each other, et cetera, versus that. But on the other hand, as you begin to get deep and you say, well, what really motivates people to, kind of put their all into their work, to be thinking about it on Saturday morning, to be navigating risks, frequently when you're in startups, you're at the definition of a wartime environment. One of the metaphors that I've popularized for thinking about startups is you jump off a cliff and assemble an airplane on the way down. It's a highly stressful thing. It's one of the reasons for that as a metaphor. And doing it with friends is a really good thing. Doing it with friends, it's part of you're much more energized, you're much more committed to the group and the team and the people and what you're doing, and you feel great about kind of the all-in kind of nature of what you're doing. Now, of course, it has a higher level of burden because as you work with friends, you have this potentially conflicting loyalties and relationships between what happens if you have to fire a friend for non-performance, or the two of you are competing for a promotion and other kinds of things. And it's part of the reason why I think part of what's important when you really start thinking through friendship is being kind of more open and transparent, not having elephants in the room. If you're kind of competing for a promotion, then put it on the table. Make sure that you're aware of it. Doesn't mean you can't compete for the promotion, And by the way, if competing for a promotion ruins your friendship, maybe your friendship wasn't that good and to be in the first place, and thinking about what friendship is. So I actually think it's really important to be working with friends. I think it's a healthy characteristic to think this person who might be joining our team is somebody who could be friends with me or friends with the people around us and some kind of thing, because I think that creates a lot of strength and resilience in the team. And by the way, I think part of the meaning of life is the paths that we go with the people we go with, right? So it's where you go and who you go with is really pretty central. And work is pretty, it's one of the fundamental parts of what we do in human life.
We spend a lot of time on building, or I mean, you spend a lot of your time talking about building companies, AI, those things. I don't think people are aware that you'll get usually through a trusted network, but you'll get a science question that you think is interesting, and then you'll begin to support that. And how many of you had met Asa Raskin personally here? He spoke as well. And what a fascinating question he asked. Could you talk a bit about how come you thought you'd support that and how you see that question set?
Yeah, so I think there was the initial founding investor, and there's some other great investors as well. So Asa comes by my office at LinkedIn, and we're talking, and we were talking about like kind of what was going on with the translation models and machine learning and artificial intelligence, and he says, look, I think I know how to pull a project together such that we can record, and this gets back to a little bit of the animal intelligence, so that we can record animals. And one of the things we get out of this kind of modern scale compute and machine learning out of human languages for free is translation. Maybe we can discover something really interesting and begin to understand these other species quite well. And I was like, okay, we just got to try, right? And this is one of the differences, is like turn over the cards and try it, versus like prepare and study. And I was just like, let's go make that happen. And they've been doing, I think, great work with this. And it's part of the part of how you look at what is now enabled, because part of what happens with new potential is new technology enables new patterns in work, in human society, in capabilities. And so, last month, I gave the commencement speech for the University of Bologna, and talking about AI in the Renaissance. And, this is one of the funny things, is we said, well, one of the things we could do very easily, and so we did this, is we created translations of the speech in 70 languages that we released along with doing the speech. But the languages included languages like Klingon, right? Because it's one of the things you get for free out of these translators. Yeah. I have no idea if it translated it well or not, because I don't speak Klingon. Right? I don't know who would know, but it was a funny thing, and that gives you part of the thing about thinking about like, okay, what kinds of ways, if we think originally with this new technology, are now prospective areas of investigation, patterns of investigations, patterns of learning that weren't available before. And part of what Asa and his crew was like, well, actually, in fact, we think that there is a number of much more intelligent things in these animals than we are thus far, and maybe this will give us a lens in understanding them.
Cool. It's been fun to watch you help that group, and Asa's great.
Yes, Asa's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we only have a minute and a half left, and without you, this wouldn't have happened. And I just want to say thank you to that from the bottom of my heart, and the people here and the companies we've helped create. A present leading in the future. And he was in another area of the country earlier today, and came here specifically to speak to all of you. So thank you for coming, Reid.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming.